Hey there, pirates. Welcome aboard the Anime No Me channel. Today we're going to talk about Luffy's latest bounty, the final reward for the Straw Hat Pirate after all the battles he's faced on his journey. I hope for your support to help our crew win, and to do so, you just need to click the thumbs up button, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel. By doing this, you will win an incredible devil fruit, so just comment which fruit you want. Guys, let's get straight to the point with a script that's going to shake the Grand Line like Luffy just activated Gear 5 in the middle of a storm. Today's theory is about Luffy's final bounty in One Piece, and why it has to be such a colossal number that the Yonko wanted posters look like grocery flyers. The idea is that Luffy's end-of-story bounty isn't just a bunch of zeros, but a symbol of the chaos he spreads by toppling the oppressive world government, exposing Imu, and liberating the world with Joy Boy's power. Let's dive into the manga chapters with facts, showing how Luffy, from a little 30 million berries pirate, becomes the most hunted man in history, with a bounty reflecting his journey from Dreamer Boy to Pirate King. Get ready for a smooth, fun text with no repetitions, using real manga moments to justify why Luffy's final bounty should be something like 5,656 million berries, or even infinite, representing the cost of global freedom. It all starts in Chapter 1 when Luffy sets sail with a crazy dream to become the Pirate King. He doesn't have a bounty yet, but he already causes trouble for the government by punching Marines and saving villages. In Chapter 96, after defeating Arlong and liberating Nami's village, Luffy gets his first bounty, 30 million berries, marking him as a threat in the East Blue. This number is just the warm-up because every step Luffy takes increases panic in Mary Joa. In Chapter 320, after the Enies lobby arc, he burns the world government's flag to save Robin, directly challenging the Celestials, and his bounty jumps to 300 million. This isn't just about strength, it's about inspiring rebellion against a system that enslaves, like in Chapter 77, where Nami is freed from Arlong's control, showing that Luffy doesn't fight for gold, but for freedom, which inflates his bounty. The escalation continues with feats that make the Gorosei tear their hair out. In Chapter 550, at Marineford, Luffy jumps into the war to save Ace, and in Chapter 580, he escapes alive, challenging admirals and inspiring pirates worldwide, which raises his bounty to 400 million in Chapter 601. Each increase reflects not only victories, but Luffy's impact as a chaos magnet that attracts allies and destroys hierarchies. In Chapter 1049, he defeats Kaido, a Yonko, and in Chapter 1054, his bounty explodes to 3 billion as the new emperor. But that's still small compared to what's coming at the end. Why? Because in Chapter 1116, Vegapunk reveals that Imu sank the ancient world in the Void Century, and when Luffy finds the One Piece in Chapter 967, like Roger did, he will reveal this truth, becoming the pirate who not only challenges the government but destroys its secrets, justifying a final bounty that reflects the cost of a new world. The final bounty number has to be epic, like 5,656 million, echoing the 56 pattern in names like Gomu Gomu and Godi Luffy, a pattern Oda loves. In Chapter 1044, Luffy awakens as Joy Boy, embodying Nika, the sun god that Vegapunk in Chapter 1116 says symbolizes liberation against tyrants like Imu. This transformation makes Luffy the greatest threat to the world government, because in Chapter 1085, Imu obliterates Lulusia with black lightning to hide crimes, and by exposing it, Luffy becomes the man worth the price of historical truth. In Chapter 957, Sengoku talks about rocks as the greatest enemy before Roger. Luffy surpasses both, because in Chapter 1096 at God Valley, he inherits the legacy of challenging Celestials, but goes further by targeting Imu directly. The final bounty isn't just about strength, it's about impact. In Chapter 580, Luffy escapes Marineford with allies, inspiring a generation of pirates, as Shanks acknowledges when he stops the war. In Chapter 1054, becoming a Yonko, he shakes global alliances, and in Chapter 1126, at Elbaf, he is closer to the One Piece, which in Chapter 967, Roger discovers as the world's secret. When Luffy reveals this, his bounty will reflect the government's fear of a global revolution, like in Chapter 320, when he defies the system for Robin, or in Chapter 814, when he forms alliances with Samurai and Minks. This bounty isn't just a number, it's the value of a free world where Luffy, as Nika in Chapter 1044, laughs in the face of oppression, making ordinary bounties look like pocket change. Luffy's bounty grows with his freedom mindset. In Chapter 68, he learns about family from Garp, but chooses freedom above all, like in Chapter 100 when facing Smoker for his dreams. In Chapter 403, his fight for Nami in Thriller Bark reinforces that he fights for people, not power, which in Chapter 1049 culminates in the victory over Kaido, raising his bounty. The final one, after defeating Imu, will be the price for the fall of Mary Joa, like in Chapter 1085, when Imu fears the truth, or in Chapter 1095, when the Gorosei transform to protect secrets. Luffy, in Chapter 1162, inherits the spirit of God Valley, where Roger and Garp challenged Rocks, but his final bounty goes beyond, marking him as the pirate who destroys the empty throne. At the climax, Luffy finds the One Piece, like Roger in Chapter 967, and uses the truth to inspire the world, as Vegapunk attempts in Chapter 1116. His final bounty, maybe 8,656,000,000 or even infinite, symbolically, reflects the cost of toppling Imu, who in Chapter 906 manipulates everything. In Chapter 597, Rayleigh trains Luffy to use Haki, preparing him for this destiny. And in Chapter 1079, Shanks acknowledges his potential, suggesting the final bounty is the price for the freedom Roger dreamed of. But what about the other crew members? Starting with Zoro, the pirate hunter who becomes Luffy's right hand in Chapter 3, with a determination that can cut mountains, and an initial bounty of 60 million in Chapter 213 after Alabasta, where he defeats Daz Bones with a move that proves his mastery of swords. Post Wano in Chapter 1054, he jumps to 1,111,000,000 for taking down King, but in the end, his bounty should explode to something like 4 billion or more, justifying why he becomes the greatest swordsman, surpassing Mihawk in Chapter 597, where he requests training. And in Chapter 1033 awakens Conqueror's Haki to master Enma, a sword that drains life, but he controls with sheer will, marking him as a threat capable of cutting through even admirals, reflecting his journey from a lone hunter to the Guardian, protecting the Pirate King's dream. Nami, the clever navigator who joins the crew in Chapter 94 after Arlong Park, starts with 16 million in Chapter 213 for stealing maps and manipulating the weather, but her intelligence explodes in Chapter 403 in Thriller Bark, where she uses the climb attack to control lightning that brings down ores. Post Wano in Chapter 1054, she earns 366 million for navigating the crew to impossible victories. But in the finale, her bounty should reach 2 billion, justifying why she maps the entire world as she dreams of in Chapter 81. And in Chapter 1116 uses Vegapunk's knowledge to expose the sinking of the world by Imu, becoming the cartographer who reveals celestial secrets. A threat the government hunts not for theft, but for guiding revolts with meteorological precision that shakes entire fleets. Usopp, the sniper of lies that become truths, joins in Chapter 41 at Syrup Village, with an initial bounty of 30 million in Chapter 213 as Soga King for shooting with precision that saves the crew. In Chapter 1054, he earns 500 million post-Wano for feats like in Chapter 1041, where he uses giant plants against Page 1. But in the end, his bounty should hit 1,500,000,000, justifying why he becomes the brave warrior he dreams of in Chapter 41, inspiring giants at Elbaf in Chapter 1126, with shots that topple armies, reflecting his evolution from coward to hero who turns tall tales into legends, a bounty the government inflates for spreading hope like seeds that grow into rebellions. Sanji, the gallant cook, who joins in Chapter 68 at Barati, starts with 77 million in Chapter 435 after Enies Lobby for flaming kicks that take down CP9. Post Wano, in Chapter 1054, he earns 1,032,000,000 for awakening the Vinsmoke genes in Chapter 1030. But in the finale, his bounty should reach 3 billion, justifying why he finds the All Blue in Chapter 56 as his dream, and in Chapter 902 helps putting alter memories, becoming the master of flirts who cooks plans that fuel revolutions, a threat the government hunts for nurturing alliances with fire that burns hierarchies. Chopper, the reindeer doctor who becomes human in Chapter 140 on Drum Island, earns an initial bounty of 50 berries in Chapter 320 as a mascot, but in Chapter 1054 jumps to 1,000 berries post-Wano, underestimated despite miraculous cures like in Chapter 820 in Zoo. In the end, his bounty should hit 500 million, justifying why he heals the world as he dreams in Chapter 140, and in Chapter 1030 uses Monster Point to protect allies. Becoming the doctor the government fears for saving enemies and inspiring loyalty with medicines that revive hope. Robin, the archaeologist who reads the past in Chapter 218 in Alabasta, earns 79 million in Chapter 320 for forbidden knowledge. But in Chapter 1054 reaches 930 million post-Wano for deciphering poneglyphs in Chapter 1026. In the finale, her bounty should explode to 2 billion, 500 million, justifying why she reveals the Void Century in Chapter 1116, like Vegapunk, becoming the historian the government hunts for exposing Imu's crimes in Chapter 1085, a threat that unearths truths that topple thrones. Franky, the cyborg shipwright who joins in Chapter 439 in Water 7, earns 44 million in Chapter 435 for building the Sunny, but in Chapter 1054 jumps to 394 million for innovations like in Chapter 1031 with lasers. In the finale, his bounty should reach 1 billion, justifying why he builds dream ships in Chapter 439, becoming the engineer the government fears for creating weapons that sail revolutions. Brook, the skeleton musician who joins in Chapter 489 in Thriller Bark, earns 33 million in Chapter 500 for fame as the Soul King, but in Chapter 1054 reaches 383 million for reviving allies with music in Chapter 1031. In the finale, his bounty should hit 800 million, justifying why he finds Laboon in Chapter 487, becoming the bard the government hunts for songs that echo eternal freedoms. Jinbe, the fishman who becomes the helmsman in Chapter 863 in Whole Cake, earns 250 million in Chapter 863 for renouncing the Shichibukai, but in Chapter 1054 jumps to 1 billion. 100 million for guiding the Sunny in Chapter 989. In the finale, his bounty should reach 2 billion, justifying why he fights for equality in Chapter 901, becoming the Sea Knight the government fears for uniting races in underwater rebellions. That was today's content. We hope you liked it and want to share your opinion on the subject. Don't forget to share the video, give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and stay amazing.